The security monitors in the Sterling penthouse showed 42 cameras, and not a single one had caught the intruder. Nora Valdez knew this because she had checked them herself 3 times in the 40 minutes since she'd found the note slipped under the door of the children's suite. It was written on cream-colored paper in a precise, unhurried hand, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had never been in a hurry about anything in their life. The girl is a loose end. Loose ends get cut. Nora had folded the note into the pocket of her uniform and gone back to the bedroom where 6-year-old Addie Sterling was sleeping, and she had stood in the doorway watching the rise and fall of the child's small chest until her own heartbeat slowed enough for her to think clearly. She could not go to the house manager. She could not go to the head of security, a man named Walt, who she was increasingly certain had left the service entrance camera on a 12-second loop for the past week. She could not call the police because the man who signed her paychecks had made it extraordinarily clear during her first hour of employment that the police did not come to the Sterling residence under any circumstances, for any reason, ever. What Nora could do, what she had been doing for the past 3 weeks since she'd been placed here through a discreet domestic staffing agency, was keep Addie Sterling alive, which was, it turned out, considerably more complicated than the job listing had suggested. The listing had read, private childcare professional needed for widower, 1 child, age 6, discretion required, competitive salary. It had not mentioned that the child hadn't spoken a single word in 4 months. It had not mentioned the rotation of highly credentialed speech therapists and developmental pediatricians who came and went from the penthouse like tides, leaving behind folders of evaluations and expressions of cautious professional concern, none of which had produced a single syllable from Addie. It had not mentioned that the child's father, Gabriel Sterling, CEO of Sterling Defense Solutions, and reportedly the 4th wealthiest private arms manufacturer in the country, moved through his own home like a man haunted by something he could neither fight nor buy his way out of, and it had absolutely not mentioned the note. Nora was 27 years old. She had a degree in early childhood development from a state school in Ohio that her mother had worked double shifts at a hotel laundry to help pay for. She had $340 in her checking account, a brother named Tomas who was 17, and living with their aunt in Queens, while Nora tried to make enough money to get him into a better situation, and a set of bruised ribs from where her previous employer, a man whose name she'd burned off every document she owned, had shoved her into a kitchen counter 3 weeks before she'd taken this job. She was not, by any metric, a person who was supposed to matter in a building like this. But Addie Sterling had looked at her on the first morning, really looked at her with those enormous dark eyes that were the only feature she'd apparently inherited from her late mother, and had slowly, without being asked, taken Nora's hand. Not to lead her anywhere, not to show her something, just to hold it, like she'd recognized something. After that, Nora had stopped counting the days until she could afford to leave. It started, as disasters in this household apparently always started, quietly. Addie had not been eating, not in the dramatic, alarming way that brought doctors rushing in with clipboards. The child ate enough to sustain herself, took her vitamins, drank water when prompted, but the joy was gone from it. She sat at the enormous kitchen island every morning and moved food around her plate with the methodical disinterest of someone doing paperwork, and no one in the house seemed to register that this was different from how she'd been 2 weeks ago, when she'd still occasionally smiled at things. Nora registered it. Nora had been watching. She tried everything she knew. She made the French toast into shapes. She let Addie arrange her own breakfast on the plate. She sat beside her and didn't say a word, just ate her own food and let the silence breathe between them the way you had to with kids who were already carrying more than their share. Nothing. On the 8th day of the not eating, Nora was in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, before the household staff arrived, before the security rotation changed, before the building's ambient noise shifted from nighttime to daytime. She was making a cup of coffee and thinking about Tomas. He had a meeting with a school counselor that morning, and she'd been trying to figure out if she could get one of the other staff to cover her for an hour so she could call him, when she heard a sound from the hallway. Small feet on marble, a pause outside the kitchen doorway. Nora did not turn around. She had learned in 3 weeks that Addie was like a bird that would land only if you pretended not to notice it coming. She poured a second cup and set it on the island. Hot chocolate, not coffee, from the pan she'd started keeping warm on the back burner after she'd noticed Addie lingering in the kitchen doorway on cold mornings. The small feet crossed the marble. A child-sized presence settled onto the bar stool. Nora turned around and slid the mug across the island without comment. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window at the city below, which at this hour was the color of a bruise healing. Then, from the bar stool, barely above a whisper, in a voice rough from 4 months of disuse. "It smells like my mum used to make." Nora set her mug down very carefully. Her chest had done something complicated and structural. "Does it?" she said, quietly, not turning around yet, giving the moment room, a long pause. She put cinnamon in it. Nora reached up to the spice rack without looking at it, her hand finding the jar by habit. She added a careful measure to the mug and slid it back. She heard the small hands close around the ceramic, another pause. Then, "Thank you." Nora finally turned around. Addie was looking at her over the rim of the mug with those dark, careful eyes. There was something happening in her face that Nora recognized as the particular expression of a child who has decided to trust someone and is terrified she's made a mistake. "Any time," Nora said. "I mean it. Any hour, day or night." Addie held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked back down at the mug. She drank. It was not a cure. It was not even close to a cure, but it was the first crack of light under a door that had been sealed shut for 4 months, and Nora felt it in her sternum like a physical thing. She did not tell anyone. She had learned, watching this household, that the surest way to make something fragile shatter was to point at it. Gabriel Sterling found out that evening anyway. Not from Nora, from the kitchen security camera. He appeared in the doorway of the children's suite at 8 o'clock, which was unusual. He typically did not come until 9, after Addie was asleep, to stand in the doorway the way Nora herself sometimes did, watching his daughter breathe. Nora was on the floor with Addie, the two of them building something complicated out of wooden blocks, when she looked up and found him there. He was in his work clothes still, a charcoal suit, the jacket discarded somewhere, the sleeves of his white shirt pushed to the elbow in a way that suggested he'd come straight from something intense. He was 39 years old, and he looked like a man who had not slept properly in considerably longer than 4 months. He was also, Nora had noted with the detached observation of someone who was absolutely not in a position to notice such things, extremely difficult to look at directly. He was looking at Addie. Addie had gone still. She was watching her father with an expression that Nora could not fully read. There was love in it, real love, the uncomplicated kind children have before they learn to protect themselves. But there was also something else, something careful. "Silas told me," Gabriel said. His voice was even, but there was a quality underneath it like ground that has been under pressure for a long time. He wasn't talking to Nora. He was talking to the room, the kitchen feed, this morning. Nora set down her block. She asked about cinnamon. Gabriel was quiet for a moment. He crossed to the bed and sat on the edge of it, not reaching for Addie, just being near her, in the tentative way of a man who has been told his presence is sometimes too large and has been trying, visibly, to make himself smaller. "Can I sit with you?" he asked the top of Addie's head. Addie considered this. Then she picked up a block and held it out to him. Gabriel took it. He looked at it. Something moved across his face that Nora was not supposed to see, so she looked back at her own blocks and pretended she hadn't. They built together in silence for a while, the three of them. When Addie's eyes started going heavy, Nora began the quiet winding down of the routine. The tidying, the water glass, the particular lamp she'd learned, Addie preferred dimmed rather than switched off entirely. Gabriel stood, and for a moment he just watched Nora work, the professional ease of someone who had figured out what the child needed and was delivering it without drama. "Monsieur Valdez," he said, in the hallway outside after Addie was asleep. "Nora," she said without thinking. Then, "Sorry, everyone calls me Nora." He studied her for a moment. "What did you do that she responded to?" "I didn't do anything. I made hot chocolate and I didn't make a big deal of it." 4 months, he said. 4 months of the best specialists in New York. "I know, and you made hot chocolate, with cinnamon," Nora said. "It was the cinnamon, Mr. Sterling, something her mother used to do. I didn't plan it, I just happened to have it out." He was quiet, the hallway was very still. Her mother put cinnamon in her hot chocolate every winter. "I forgot." Nora felt the weight of that, the specific punishing weight of the thing you forget about someone you've lost and what it costs you when you remember. "Kids carry things we don't know they're carrying," she said carefully. She wasn't rejecting food. She was rejecting everything that didn't feel like her mother. Gabriel was looking at her the way people look at something they weren't expecting and don't quite have a category for. "How old are you?" 27. "How do you know that?" Nora thought about her mother, who had worked herself into a bad back and worse knees so that Nora could go to school. She thought about Tomas, who cried once when he thought she couldn't hear him after everything with their mother's illness. "I had some practice," she said, "with grief, in smaller rooms than this one." Gabriel looked at her for another long moment. Then he nodded, a single precise dip of his head, and walked back toward his study without another word. Nora stood in the hallway and exhaled slowly. She did not mention the note in her pocket. Not yet. She was still deciding what she knew and what she could prove. What she knew by the end of the following week fit together the way the worst puzzles do, reluctantly, each piece making the picture worse. It started with the food. Addie had begun eating again, tentatively and on her own schedule, circling back toward the things that had given her pleasure before the silence set in. Nora had learned to stock the kitchen with the specific brand of crackers and the specific kind of apple that were acceptable, had learned which textures were wrong on bad days and which ones anchored Addie when she was drifting. The child was not healed. Healing was not something that happened in a week, but she was present in a way she hadn't been, and she was speaking, quietly and sparingly but consistently, to no one else. But that was fine. That was how it worked. What was not fine was the afternoon Nora went to prepare Addie's afternoon snack. The apple, sliced, with the specific almond butter that had taken 3 grocery trips to identify as acceptable, and found one of the sealed packages of crackers already opened, sitting on the counter, as though someone had taken one and put the rest back. Nora lived in the staff quarters on the floor below. She had not opened that package. She had not been in the kitchen since morning. She stood very still in front of the counter. She thought about the cameras. She thought about Walt and the looping security feed. She thought about the note on cream-colored paper. She did not feed Addie the crackers from that package. She opened a new one from the pantry and put the other aside, sealed in a plastic bag, labeled with a date, tucked into the very back of her own personal locker. She did not tell anyone. Not yet. The second thing happened 2 days later. Addie had an appointment with her current speech therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Park who came on Tuesday afternoons and had enough patience to sit through an entire session of silence without filling it anxiously. Nora usually waited in the hallway. This Tuesday she was on her way back from the kitchen with water for both of them when she passed the open door of the home office and heard a voice she didn't recognize. The child is improving. The voice was a woman's, cultured, low, with the precision of someone who chooses every word deliberately, which complicates things considerably. A pause, someone responding, too low to make out. A living heir changes the terms of the merger entirely. The sterling assets are tied to the succession clause. If the girl is declared competent and thriving, the board cannot move on the acquisition for another 12 years. Another pause. That is not acceptable to our partners. Nora kept walking, smoothly, at the same pace. She did not look in through the doorway. Her heart was doing something violent behind her ribs. In the hallway outside the speech therapy room, she sat down in the chair she always used, set the 2 glasses of water precisely on the small table beside it, folded her hands in her lap, and stared at the middle distance until her face arranged itself back into professional composure. The voice had belonged to Renata Voss. Nora had seen her twice in the building. She was introduced as a corporate consultant, something to do with the company's European operations. She dressed expensively and spoke to the household staff the way people speak to furniture, and she had brought Addie a gift on her first visit that Addie had refused to touch. Nora had noticed that too. She had filed it away. She was very good at filing things away. Survival had taught her that. That evening, after Addie was asleep, Nora sat on the edge of her own bed in the staff quarters and looked at the plastic bag in her locker and thought about what she had and what she could do with it. She thought about the note. She thought about the crackers. She thought about a woman's voice saying the child is improving, which complicates things considerably. She thought about Addie's hand in hers on the first morning. She thought about Tomas, who needed her alive and employed and not disappeared from a building no one would talk about. Then she went to Gabriel Sterling's study and knocked on the door. He opened it himself. He was at his desk, surrounded by the architecture of a powerful man's working night, multiple screens, a glass of something amber and mostly full, the particular controlled disorder of serious ongoing work. He looked at her with the alert, assessing expression of someone who has learned that people do not knock on his door after 10 p.m. unless something has gone wrong. The crackers in the kitchen were tampered with, Nora said. I've saved them. I also heard Renata Voss on Tuesday afternoon in your office talking about Addie's recovery complicating a business acquisition and the terms of something she called a succession clause. She paused and, 3 weeks ago, before any of this, someone left a note under the door of Addie's suite. I have it. Gabriel Sterling was very still. You've been holding this for 3 weeks, he said. I didn't know yet if I could trust you. Something moved in his expression, not offense exactly, more like recognition. And now? I watched you sit on her floor and build blocks with her for 45 minutes without once making it about yourself. Nora said, and you remembered eventually about the cinnamon. You just needed someone to remind you. She looked at him steadily. I think you love your daughter. I think you're surrounded by people who are counting on the fact that grief makes you slow. And I think Renata Voss has been in this building for 2 months, which is exactly how long the camera in the service corridor has been running on a loop. The silence in the study was absolute. Gabriel set down his glass. "Silas," he said to the room. A door Nora hadn't noticed opened in the wall paneling to her left. A man in his 40s stepped out, compact, watchful, with the unhurried bearing of someone who is always the most dangerous person in any room and has learned to be quiet about it. He looked at Nora without expression. "The crackers first," Gabriel said. "I want a full toxicology analysis by morning. Then I want everything Walt has touched in the past 60 days, and I want to know the name of every person Renata Voss has been in contact with inside this building." He finally looked back at Nora. "Go to sleep," he said, not unkindly. "I'll wake you if I need to." "You won't need to," Nora said. "I won't be sleeping." A pause, then almost to himself, "No, I don't suppose you will." The crackers came back by 4 a.m. The results were delivered on an encrypted tablet that Silas placed on Gabriel's desk without comment. Nora was still in the study. She had made coffee, properly, on the machine in the adjoining kitchen, without asking, and placed a cup near Gabriel's elbow an hour ago. He had drunk it without registering where it came from, which she recognized as the highest compliment a person in his state of focus could pay. When Silas placed the tablet down and stepped back, Gabriel looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned it toward Nora. She read the highlighted lines twice. The crackers had been laced with a compound her toxicology vocabulary wasn't good enough to fully pass, but the summary was clear. A synthetic sedative agent, pediatric dosage calibration, designed for gradual accumulation in a small child's system over a period of days. The presenting symptoms would have looked like a relapse, withdrawal, behavioral regression, the kind of thing that would undo 4 months of recovery in a week, the kind of thing that looked like a child who was not, in fact, improving. "She wasn't eating them," Nora said, hearing her own voice from a distance. She'd moved on to the apples. She hadn't touched the crackers in 4 days. "I know," Gabriel said. He was looking at the tablet with an expression that was frighteningly empty. "Silas, already on it," Silas said. "Walt is currently in the basement. Renata Voss arrived at the building 40 minutes ago. She's in the lobby. She's here?" Nora turned. "She received a message this evening," Silas said, from a number registered to Mr. Sterling's personal line, informing her that Addie had suffered a significant setback, that the progress was reversed, that Mr. Sterling was asking for her counsel. He paused. "Mr. Sterling sent already on his feet." "I sent it," Silas said. "On your behalf, I apologize for the presumption." Something flickered across Gabriel's face that was not quite a smile. "Don't," he looked at Nora. "Stay with Addie, I know," Nora said. She was already moving toward the door. She was at Addie's bedside when she heard the sounds from below. Not violence, exactly, nothing dramatic enough to wake the child, but the particular quality of a confrontation being conducted by people who are very practiced at not making noise. She watched Addie breathe. She did not move. An hour and a half passed. The door of the suite opened quietly. Gabriel was still in his dress shirt, still without the jacket, the sleeves still pushed up. He looked like someone who had just done something that cost him something. Not regret. She didn't read regret. Something more like the exhaustion on the other side of a decision that couldn't be unmade. He looked at Addie first, then at Nora. "Renata Voss is being held for the police," he said quietly. "For once, we're making an exception." A pause. "Walt will not be a problem. The board members connected to the acquisition have been notified that the matter is now a criminal matter, which it is, and that the succession clause will be reviewed by counsel." He stopped at the foot of Addie's bed and looked at his daughter the way people look at the thing they almost lost. Silas matched the formula in the crackers to a compound sourced through a private lab in Switzerland. He has the purchase records. He said it in the flat tone of a man reciting a list because the alternative is not reciting a list. It would have taken another week. Maybe 2. She would have deteriorated. The board would have voted to remove me as primary guardian pending her evaluation. Renata would have been named interim custodian. He paused again. She is Addie's maternal aunt. Nora processed this, the only family, the only one with standing, and significant debt I've now learned to European partners I had not been paying close enough attention to. His jaw moved. "I have been inattentive." "You were grieving," Nora said. "That's not an excuse in my position." "I didn't say it was an excuse. I said it was a reason." She looked at him steadily. "There's a difference." He looked at her. In the low light of the room, with Addie sleeping between them, the distance between who he was in the world and who he was in this room was very clear, and Nora thought she understood something about him that his entire security apparatus probably didn't. He sat down in the chair beside Addie's bed, not the one Nora used, the one on the other side, and he rested his elbows on his knees and looked at his daughter, and he didn't say anything for a long time. "She spoke to you first," he finally said. "Yes, not the therapists, not me. You." I wasn't trying, Nora said. That's usually how it works. Another silence. Then, what do you need? Your situation, Silas briefed me, your brother, the debt from your previous. He stopped. I should have known all of this before I let you into this house. I didn't look closely enough. Nora thought about what it had taken her to come to him. She thought about Tomas. She thought about the bruises on her ribs that had finally stopped hurting 2 weeks ago. I need Tomas to be safe, she said. And I need to know I'm staying here because you trust me, not because you owe me. Both can be true. They usually aren't. Gabriel was quiet for a moment. Your brother's situation will be handled, the rest. He met her eyes directly. I need you to stay, not because of tonight, because of her. He looked at Addie. She chose you before any of this. I watched it on the feed for 3 weeks and I didn't understand it. I think I do now. Nora looked at Addie, at the small, sleeping face that had given her its trust in the dark before she'd done a single thing to earn it. She thought about the morning with the hot chocolate. She thought about how the child had held her hand on the first day and she hadn't pulled away. Okay, she said. It was not complicated, it was just the truth. In the weeks that followed, the Sterling penthouse changed by increments too small for any one moment to contain. The acquisition attempt collapsed. The board members who had been quietly coordinating with Renata Voss resigned. Silas, it emerged, had been tracking the financial irregularities for months and had been waiting for something concrete enough to move on. The crackers, Nora's preserved evidence, had been that thing. Gabriel spent 4 days in back-to-back meetings Nora knew about only because the study light was on when she passed it at midnight and off when she passed it again at 5. She did not see much of him during those days. She didn't need to. Addie needed her, steadily and consistently, in the particular way children need people who have figured out their specific frequencies. The speech therapist, Dr. Park, began arriving twice a week instead of once. Addie was still quiet by most standards, but she was present. She was asking for things. She was cautiously and on her own terms returning. On a Thursday evening, Nora was in the kitchen making dinner. She'd started doing this, cooking actual meals for the two of them, instead of relying on the house chef's portioned staff trays, because Addie ate better when the food smelled like something personal. When she heard small feet and then slightly larger, less frequent footsteps, Gabriel appeared in the kitchen doorway with Addie on his back, her arms around his neck, her chin on top of his head. He was wearing a sweater for the first time since Nora had met him, which made him look like a different version of himself entirely. "We want to know what you're making," Addie announced. Nora looked at them both. Something she'd been keeping careful and contained in her chest had been quietly rearranging itself for weeks now, and she had been doing her best to ignore it, and she was running out of places to put it. "Pasta," she said, "with the sauce from scratch because someone." She looked at Addie, told me the jar sauce tastes like a tin can. "It does," Addie said severely. "She's not wrong," Gabriel said. He set Addie down, and she immediately crossed to the bar stool she'd claimed as hers, pulling herself up with the focused effort of a 6-year-old who has decided something is worth doing. Gabriel did not leave. He leaned against the counter on the opposite side, in the way of someone who is not in a hurry. "Can I help?" he said. Nora looked at him. "Have you made pasta before?" "Then you can stir," she said, and handed him the wooden spoon. Addie watched them from her bar stool with the quiet satisfaction of a child who has orchestrated exactly what she wanted. And Nora caught her expression and felt something warm and uncomplicated open in her chest for the first time in longer than she could remember. Later, when the pasta was made and eaten and Addie was bathed and read to and asleep, Nora found Gabriel still in the kitchen. He had cleaned up, which she hadn't asked him to do, and he was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has made a decision and is not entirely sure how to deliver it. "Silas wants to formalize your security clearance," he said. "Full biometric access. Same as seen the opposite counter." Nora leaned against the wanted to say. A beat no. The kitchen was quiet. Below them, the city was doing what cities do at night. The ambient glow of it came through the windows, amber and grey, and in it Gabriel Sterling looked very much like a man who was tired of being armored in every room of his own house. "I don't know how to do this," he said, "whatever this is. I don't have a framework for it. You don't need one, a negotiation. Everything in my life is a negotiation. Not this." She held his gaze and didn't look away. "You sat on your daughter's floor and built blocks with her without a single agenda. You're not as incapable of this as you think you are." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the kitchen, slowly and without ambiguity, and stood close enough that Nora could see the particular quality of exhausted sincerity in his expression, the thing underneath the reserve that he spent enormous energy keeping covered. "You are the most unexpectedly formidable person I have ever had in my employ," he said. "That is a significant field. Despite herself, despite everything, Nora laughed. It surprised them both. He smiled then, a real one, unguarded, the first she had seen on him that wasn't directed at Addie. It changed his whole face. "Stay," he said. It was not a command, it was not an offer. It was just the word, offered plainly without the armor. Not as staff, as, he stopped, searching. I don't have the vocabulary for it yet. But stay. Nora thought about the morning 3 weeks ago when she had stood at a kitchen counter and decided not to turn around because turning around would startle the fragile thing she could feel hovering in the room. She thought about how sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was hold still and let someone come to you. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He reached out and touched her face briefly, with the careful deliberateness of a man unlearning how to be careless with things he couldn't afford to lose. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, light as permission. From the hallway, barely audible, came the small patter of feet that had absolutely no business being out of bed. They both heard it. Addie appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with the owl on the front, blinking in the kitchen light with entirely unconvincing sleepiness. She looked at the two of them. She looked at the particular way they were standing. "I was thirsty," she announced. "Of course you were," Nora said. She pushed off the counter and went to the cabinet for a glass, and Addie crossed to the bar stool and climbed up. And Gabriel Sterling stood in the kitchen of his own home with the expression of a man who has just remembered what it feels like to not be alone in it. Nora filled the glass and set it in front of Addie, and Addie drank, and over the rim of the glass, her dark eyes moved between Nora and her father, with the focused contentment of a child who has worked very hard to make something happen, and is pleased with the result. She had chosen Nora on the first morning. She had always known something they were only just catching up to. Nora looked at the two of them. This man and this small, extraordinary girl who had found her voice again in a kitchen over cinnamon and hot chocolate. And she felt, for the first time in longer than she could measure, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be.